Hello, dear students. Today, the mother has asked me to talk to you about disagreement in self-evident principles, okay? We talked about borrowed principles. We talked about self-explanatory principles. Remember, in borrowed principles, there is no disagreement. You can look at that video. And in self-explanatory principles from science, from modern science, there's disagreement, but only in time. Einstein and Newton nobody disagrees. Everyone's on the side of Einstein, or then everybody's on the side of quantum physics. But when they're together, there's disagreement. But there's real disagreement in self-evident principles, okay? So I'm going to give you an easy one, and then give you a hard one, just to give you an example of what I mean, or what is meant by self-evident disagreement in self-evident principles. And as we talked about before, just now today, I think, we had disagreement ourselves in a self-evident principle in Euclid, in geometry. And that is, what is a point? What is a line? We all thought that a line was a collection of a bunch of points, an indefinite number of points, an infinite number of points. But then after discussion and disagreement, we came to the conclusion that a line is a breadthless length and a point is that which has no part. And notably, we found there's a distinction between, or there's one thing to think about a point and another thing to have an image of a point. It's one thing to think about what a line is, or to understand, to have the idea of a line, and to draw it, because they're different. How a line is, in my understanding, is different than how a line is on the whiteboard, okay? So anyway, there you saw that we had disagreement, and through disagreement, we came to the first principle, self-evident first principle, that a point is that which has no part. And then from there, we're able to build upon that knowledge with arguments to come to scientific knowledge in geometry. For example, the interior angles of a triangle being equal to 2 right angles. That depended on this. And we're going to talk about certitude another day, okay, when we get closer towards talking about Descartes. But right now we're just talking about self-evident principles, okay? I'm going to give you a hard one now. And I don't expect you to understand it, but I'm not going to complete it altogether, but it's a self-evident principle in philosophy, okay? And this disagreement is between Aristotle and Empedocles. Empedocles lived before Aristotle. And Aristotle, when he launches the physics is talking about nature, why things change in nature, why there's growth, why there's death, why there's decay, why there's substantial change, okay? And what that means. So Aristotle argues through disagreement with Empedocles and others to a first principle, and that is this: nature acts for the sake of an end. Nature acts for the sake of something. Nature acts for a definite good that is agreeable to that nature, okay? And then nature would be an internal principle of an action, an internal principle of an organized action, say. Okay, so let that be for a while. Now we're going to argue that nature acts for the sake of an end. Nature acts for the sake of something. Aristotle looked at Empedocles. Well, first let's look at our own experience, okay? And Aristotle looked at our own experience. You can look at what other people say, you can look at what we say or whatever. Now, we tend to think that we act for the sake of agreeable things. That is to say, we act for the sake of an end. And that's fine, okay? So we're hungry, so we make a pizza to eat a pizza. And that's agreeable to us, and that helps us sustain our nature, say. And that's our experience with other animals too. But what about, don't we also have experience of things happen for our good that are contrary to what we were trying to do? Okay, what we were trying to do. For example, oh, by the way, I'm getting most of this charla based upon that same lecture that Michael Ogros gave at Thomas Aquinas College in, I think it was 2016, Why Philosophers Disagree. So I learned a lot from him when I was a student, and I learn a lot from him now when I read his articles and I read his books, okay? Michael Ogros, professor at Thomas Aquinas College. This discussion that I'm giving you comes from his paper on his lecture on why philosophers disagree. Okay. So, isn't it our experience even that sometimes things happen for our good when it's contrary to what we were trying to do? Dr. Agros gives this example of, we want to catch a plane to go to Europe and we get caught in a traffic jam. And so we miss the plane. The plane takes off before we arrive to the airport. And what happened? That plane crashed in the Atlantic Ocean and everybody died in it. So it was our good to not achieve our end in that case. And why did we not get on that plane? Chance, absolute chance. What we were trying to do is to get on the plane, but by chance, there was this traffic jam. By chance, we got caught into that traffic jam, and then by chance, we missed the flight, and by chance didn't die that day. So Empedocles, the guy that Aristotle takes up, Aristotle does dialectic in his work on the physics. He does disagreement in order to arrive at first principles, okay? And Empedocles saw these things. He saw that things happen by chance. And he especially saw that things happen by chance in nature. Sometimes rain falls and it helps the animals. Sometimes rain falls, making a flood, and it kills the animals. It's bad for the animals. And so you say that seems to be falling by chance, say the rain falls by chance, sometimes for the good of animals, sometimes for the bad of animals. And so the question is, what comes first? Things that happen for the sake of an end, like when we try to eat pizza, or things which happen by chance. And so look, we have rain and human beings and other animals. And Empedocles, wisely so, said, well look, what comes first, elements or animals? Well, elements are prior to animals because animals have elements. Okay, so if elements are prior to animals and chance comes with the action of elements, then chance must happen before animals do what they do. Nature, elements do what they do by chance, according to Empedocles, before animals do what they do. Now watch this with the argument of Empedocles. So if that's by chance, and these elements clearly aren't trying to act for the sake of the animals, they're just things are happening by chance, the rain falls by chance, killing this animal, helping that animal, it must be the case that all things, because animals are made up of elements, it must be the case that all things happen by chance. And so why do we have, and the next question is, why do we have things which are good? And Empedocles argues, very much like, do you remember when we did the big history project, that Goldilocks moment? Do you remember the Goldilocks moment? That's basically Empedocles' argument from, by the way, thousands of years ago, that the elements move around by chance, and then sometimes something happens that's really good for those elements, and the good persists. So when things happen that are good, then it tends to keep happening that way until something other gets in the way. Okay, so that's the Goldilocks moment. So what Aristotle will do in the physics, he'll take up that argument and say, okay, that's pretty interesting. But don't you want to say this, Empedocles? Don't you want to say that at least the falling of the rain is determinate? You can predict that future outcome by the rain almost always. It tends to do that. So rain tends to fall. Rain then tends to act for a definite outcome insofar as it tends to fall. So rain falls today, rain falls tomorrow, rain falls in 2 years from now, rain fell last year. Doesn't rain tend then to fall? And that is to say, act for a definite outcome, falling. So if that's the case, that even elements act for a definite outcome, and even the elements, it seems like, say, fire. Fire will not only tend to act for a definite outcome, but for an outcome that's good for the fire. So fire will tend to heat things up, and that helps sustain the life of the fire, say. So elements tend to act for definite outcomes, at least some definite outcomes, and they tend to act for an outcome that's agreeable to themselves. Fire, it's agreeable to fire to have heat. Why can't you say that with other things in nature? So, for example, the embryo of a horse, a little, how do you say horse in castellano? Caballo. The embryo, and how do you say embryo? The little baby?
Embrión.
Embryon. The embryo de caballo, the embryo of the horse, why can't it act for a definite outcome that is agreeable to itself? So why can it not be that the embryo of the horse, the little thing that's not a horse yet, as it's growing, it's trying to make little horse eyes, and it's trying to give itself 4 legs. Why can't you say that? If the rain tends to fall, why can't you say the embryo of a horse tends, that is acting for a definite outcome agreeable to itself, tends to make little horse eyes and little horse legs and things like that? And you can't get around that in Empedocles. And so what does Empedocles do? He denies that the horse is a nature. Okay, and that's not a dumb thing to say, but notice how he couldn't get around that first principle of Aristotle, that nature acts for an end. Okay, so what he had to do in the case of a horse, in the case of things that move around and we see things moving besides elements, he had to deny that that's a specific nature, but rather an association of other natures, a bunch of elements coming together, the atomic theory say, which isn't that new. Empedocles was thinking about that. That it's just these little elements that move around in a different way. So a horse is not really its own nature. It's only those little elements that are their own natures. And that's fine, but still, he granted in his argument, and he couldn't get around it, that those little elements act in a way that is for a definite outcome pleasing to them. Now, you might have to get into another argument with Empedocles. What do you mean by nature? That would be another first principle, okay? So, not perfectly. We need to have some time together and discuss this. I don't expect to have shown to you the way I showed you that the whole is greater than the part. I didn't just show you that nature acts for an end and you see it perfectly. But at least we began to see, wow, disagreement there between Empedocles and Aristotle was really good, because that helps us be a little bit more clear. The first time I heard Father Tony say nature acts for an end, I didn't even know what that means. And then maybe after discussing it or watching this video and watching it again, I have a general idea what that means, and it might even be true. Now, in my case, I know that it's true. And why? Because I did all this discussion with friends studying Aristotle's physics. And what you find is that it's the disagreement itself between Empedocles and Aristotle and others that help you discover that there is something there. I didn't think about nature acting for an end before, but now I'm thinking about it. And then as you do all these dialectical arguments, and you say, well, it can't be that, like we just did with Empedocles, and it can't be this, what we might say do with Heraclitus or something like that. And so it must be, the only other option is that we have this, that nature acts for the sake of an end. So you see the disagreement helped me find that self-evident principle, okay? Just find it. It's going to be another step. So with all these things, you say, I cleared this out, there was this disagreement, okay, I can't see it's that. So there must be this, look at this, it's the only thing left standing, that nature acts for the sake of an end. Now, how do I understand that? If I found it, but now how do I know that it's true? Watch this. Because it's self-evident. Okay? So you see that? It's the disagreement that helps you discover the first self-evident principle. I mean, that self-evident principle. But it's the very fact that it's self-evident that makes you understand it. It's the only reason you didn't see it before and understand it before is because nature loves to hide. As one of the pre-Socratics said, I can't remember who it was now. Isn't that beautiful? Nature loves to hide. Our intellect, that we have an intellect and all this stuff, is pretty clear to us. But what the nature of a horse is, what nature is itself, that's difficult because that's all caught up in stuff, elements, natures, etc. But once we have dialectical discussion and disagreements, and we start separating and see that it will only be this or that, and then see that it can only be this, you say, okay, and now watch this. Because it's self-evident, boom, you see it. Just like you saw that a point is that which has no part. You didn't see that at the beginning. But once we had all these discussions, you say, okay, I get it now. A point is that which has no part. And so Aristotle does that in the physics, and he does that with other first principles, and he starts putting things together, and we can talk more about it another day. Okay, so all I wanted to do was give you an example of what it means to have that. First of all, I want to show you that there is disagreement in self-evident principles and coming to self-evident principles, and that's a good thing. And that in that disagreement, you can find that self-evident principle, and in finding the self-evident principle, you see it yourself because it's self-evident. Okay? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.